It's Ash from Super Videos, back for another video for The Walking Dead. In this video, we're going to be taking a look at the recent news that we got that we're going to see yet another spin-off series for The Walking Dead. In this video, we're going to be looking at the top 10 spin-off theories that are out there. Now, before getting into this, I do want to cover this real quick as well. There were a lot of people wondering whether we were going to have any merchandise for the channel, and I've officially opened up a store for the channel on Teespring where you can buy a lot of merchandise there. Now we have a variety of different merchandise. You can buy channel specific merchandise like this t-shirt here, that's just for the channel, just to show your support and to join our family. But also there's tons of other options for you as well. If you are interested in just zombie related shirts, we have a little bit of that. If you want some Walking Dead shirts, we have a lot of that here. And also make sure to use the promo code SUPERV19 during checkout to get a 35% discount on any purchase this week on the store. This special offer ends Saturday, March 9th, 2019. So make sure you make use of that and you jump on that right away. First up, we have none other than Negan. So the first theory is that we're going to see a Negan spin-off, and it's going to be somehow a story related to Negan, and we are going to see Negan's journey as a hero this time. And, you know, they could do a lot with that, and they could even, you know, integrate Negan's backstory from the comics with the Here's Negan comic book series that we had, and they could have, you know, that kind of come into play as well, but not really have the whole spinoff be about the Here's Negan. They could have us following Negan as a hero this time, and then through Negan's journey as a hero, we could get his backstory that way. And they could bring in the Here's Negan into the story that way. And, you know, how they could have that happen is we could have Negan on the original show be exiled or be sent away, same sort of way that they did it in the comics, and then we can have Negan start the spin-off afterwards. Now, I am a big fan of this idea. I think this could definitely work, and I think that there's definitely a lot of interest in that, and I think it will be unique and exciting to get to see Negan as a hero. The next theory is that the spin-off could be actually related to Rick's relatives, his brother. So in the comics, there was a separate alternative story that was related to Rick's brother, Jeff. And we kind of followed his story. He was in Europe at the time that the apocalypse was happening in Barcelona. And we saw his story that way and how he was trying to get back to his family. Now, they could do something where we could see something like this. Now, I don't think we're going to see that exact story from the comic book or from the separate comic book that we had, mainly because AMC just simply does not own it. Because for AMC to be able to bring that to life directly, they would need to have it in the comics first, in the main comic book. They don't have that. So because of that, they don't necessarily have the rights to have that story come into play in the story. For those of you that don't know, the story in the comics, the separate story was called The Alien. That's why I have The Alien here. They simply can't do the same exact thing. Can they have another story where we follow another one of Rick's relatives, maybe another one of his brothers, maybe a sister or maybe something like that? Absolutely. Is the interest there? Maybe. But I think this could be a hit or miss because it's a brand new character. And, you know, there could be interest for it, but at the same time, there's also a risk because it could be a complete failure. We've already seen how Fear the Walking Dead almost failed or is failing based on who you ask. But I think they could potentially fall into the same hole. As great as this is, as intriguing as it is, as interesting as it is, there is a chance that is going to fail. And like I said, we saw what they did with Fear the Walking Dead and how it almost failed. And they had to bring in crossover characters to save it. So I think they could potentially go the same route with this. So because of that, I'm leaning more towards this being just a far-fetched idea, even though it would be great because not only is it something that's related, but also it's in Europe if they follow the same kind of story. And because of that, it's going to be a unique environment and a a new kind of atmosphere. But at the same time, I do believe that even if they get around the issue with them not having the rights to it and everything, it would be a big risk because it's a hit or miss. Next up, we have Maggie. So we could potentially see a Maggie spinoff. They've talked about that before. There were a lot of speculations about that. There were interviews about that, but we just don't know for sure. But Maggie definitely has a chance to get her own spinoff. And we could potentially see Maggie's journey to Georgie's community and maybe her story after that. Because think about it, Maggie's not even in the story right now. She is with Georgie. So we could see, what happened to Maggie, why she left, or after she left, and then we could follow her story to Georgie's community, and maybe after that. Now, as great as that is, as interesting as that would be, I think that what they need to do first is bring Maggie back, finish her story in the TV show in a way, and then send her off into the spin-off like that. But I do think there is interest for that. I do believe that they could make it work, and I do believe that Maggie has her own fan base, and this would definitely work. Now, another thing that's related is that Maggie's actress, Lauren Cohan, actually has her own TV show now, Whiskey Cavaliers, and it seems like it's doing pretty well. So that's another thing to keep in mind and to bring into the picture, because if she's going to star on her own show, Whiskey Cavaliers, will she have enough time to do a spin-off show and be a star for that? I don't know. So that's another thing that you do need to keep in mind. Next up, Michonne. We could see a Michonne spin-off. So there's been already talks that we will have season 10 be Michonne's final season, much like season 9 was Rick's final season. Michonne's story after that is definitely up in the air. We don't know what's going to happen to her. There's definitely been a lot of theories and rumors that she's going to be connected to Rick again in some way in the movies, and she's going to join up with Rick in the movies. And that's definitely still a possibility. But there's still definitely a possibility that we're going to have a situation where that could happen, but at the same time, we could have Michonne in her own spin-off as well. But then again, Danai Gurira has a lot of projects coming. She is a star. Will she stick around to become a star in her own show? That's another thing we need to keep in mind and to kind of think about. I think along with Negan and Maggie, she's my pick as well for, one of those possible spinoffs that we could see. Next up is something that you might not necessarily think about as the first thing, but it's the governor. We could have a backstory for the governor, and we could see a story where they bring back to life the backstory that they wrote for the governor in the comics. It wasn't necessarily just in the comics, they wrote a whole book about it, Rise of the Governor. So we could potentially see something like that. Maybe a backstory for the governor before we met with him in the TV show and the comics, and maybe even we could have his story start from even before the apocalypse, way before the apocalypse, and follow him that way. And then they could kind of follow his story until he becomes the governor, and then we could see him as the governor until he meets with Rick and the other survivors, or finds them. And for this one specifically, I do think that will be interesting. There is definitely a lot of interest for that. Enough time has passed for us to be interested in the governor's story, and I think that the actor David Morrissey would be game for it. He would be interested to do a project like that, and he is a great actor that did great with the character that he was given. So I do think there's a lot of interest for it. There is a possibility that this could come into play as well. But I do believe that there's an expiration date on a story like that. Like, they could drag it on and make it like 6-7 seasons or something like that. But at the same time, after that, there's really no future. And there's more future for a spin-off with Michonne, Maggie, or even Negan. But for the governor, I feel like there's going to be an expiration on the story that they're going to write for him, because at some point his story is going to match or overlap his story when he was introduced in the main comic book. So there's that aspect of it as well. Next up, we have Simon. Now, we could see something very interesting where they bring back Stephen Ogg as Simon and give him his backstory. Now, you might be wondering, how will that work? Well, For starters, they could definitely name it Simon Says. That would be an interesting title. But how would it even work? What would be very, very interesting in my eyes would be a scenario where they not only bring Simon and have him be the main star, but also they could integrate Negan in there somehow as well. And they could have Negan making appearances. So what we could see is a scenario where we have Simon, maybe before the apocalypse or shortly after the apocalypse, he's surviving. He finds these groups and whatever. He joins with the Saviors. We could see how that happens. So in a way, it's a backstory for how Simon joins with the Saviors. And then through that, we could see Negan. And we could have Jeffrey Dean Morgan as Negan appearing, co-starring in the show somehow. And then after that, we could see a scenario where at some point Negan becomes the leader of the Saviors. Maybe we don't have it right away so that Negan is the leader. So we could have, Negan becoming the leader of the Saviors. And, we could be following Simon instead of Negan though. And then after that, we could have all of that story continue until we have the roadblock by Simon in 616 of the original show. And that would be very, very epic. Now, just like the governor's story, there's definitely going to be an exploration on this type of story as well. Next up, we have something that's a little far-fetched, a little bit of a stretch, but we could have the Walking Dead Telltale series, the game, brought into a TV show of some sort. So it'll be like a story for Clementine and Lee. Now, I have not played the game myself, so I can't really speak to this theory that much, but I do think it would be interesting. But again, just like what we had with The Alien, with Rick's brother, this is the same sort of way. AMC does not own Lee and Clementine's story or the Telltale story. They don't own it. They could only own it if it comes into the comics in some way first. So because of that, they don't have the rights to their story. So they can't really have that happen. So because of that, I think this is too much of a stretch. It's, again, intriguing and interesting, but it's a stretch because they don't own it. Next up, which is something that I think would be kind of interesting but wouldn't really work. And that's a theory going around that the spinoff could be about Eugene, Abraham, and Rosita and their journey before they met up with Rick and the others. Now, first thing I do want to say is, looking at the actor's schedule, I don't know if that's going to work. I mean, Eugene is still alive, and I'm assuming he's going to still be sticking around and be surviving for quite a long time. But Abraham is dead, so he could join the spinoff in that way. And I am speculating Rosita is going to die at the end of the season. So Rosita can also join. But how can Eugene join, And how is that going to work? So as much as I think this is cool and interesting, and I think there is definitely fans that would want to see it, so there's a lot of interest, I do believe the schedules of the actors will not necessarily make it possible to do this. Even Michael Cutlitz as Abraham, he's working on other projects, so will he be available for this? Not really sure. And also, just like the other types of stories that I talked about, there's an expiration date for this, because you can only tell so much until you reach a point where they meet up with Rick and the others. And if they're going for a longer term thing, this would not be a great idea because it's going to end at some point. Even if they drag it on to like 5 seasons, it's going to have to end at some point. Next up, which is the most obvious one, is we could see new survivors. Much like what we had with Fear the Walking Dead. Is it repetitive? Absolutely. Does this type of story have a risk of failing again, much like what happened with Fear? Absolutely. Could it work? Yes. But it's one of those things where it's like a hit or miss again. And I think if they follow the same recipe with Fear, it's almost absolutely going to fail. Last up, which is a combination of all of these things, is we could see something along the lines of having several independent seasons. Each season is going to focus on a well-known survivor or a new survivor that could transition into one of the stories that we have going on. Either Fear, The Walking Dead's original, or a movie if they do a movie. You know what I mean? So we could have potentially something along the lines of Season 1 is Negan. Season 2 is Abe and Eugene and Rosita. Season 3 is Michonne. Season 4 is Maggie, and so on. And maybe some seasons we have, some survivors that we've never seen before, and they could integrate into the main stories that we have, Fear or the TV show or the movies. I think that could be interesting. Will it work? I don't know. That would be another one of those unique things that they could do, but at the same time, because it's so new and it hasn't been done before in stories like this, that it could potentially fail. But these are basically the top 10 theories that are going around for what the spinoff could be for The Walking Dead. But I am definitely very interested to know your thoughts and opinions. Which one of these theories do you most agree with, and which do you want to see? Because those are not necessarily the same. But I do want to know your opinions. I'm very, very interested to know your opinions about this. That's it for this video. See you next time for another super video. If you like what you see, press like, subscribe for more content, and press the bell button to receive notifications for daily uploads.